Steering Committee meeting for September 16th, 2020. We'll follow the agenda, which was as tagged in issue number 922 in the TSC repo. But before we get to the issues that were tagged, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share?
We should probably share that security releases went out yesterday. So check them out and update where you can.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other announcements? Okay, so moving on to CPC and board meeting updates. I don't have any specific updates from the board front. And I don't think that there's anything in our board, in the admin board, in terms of actions for things to be taken to the board. Let me know if there's anything that you do think should be going on that's not there. In terms of the CPC, Mary, I guess that's sort of old news, but Mary has taken over from Mateo on that front. I'm trying to think if there's anything in particular. I don't think there's anything particular to kind of bring back to the TSC from the discussion this week. Yeah, nothing I think that comes to mind. So unless there's questions, let's move on to the tagged issues there. Okay, so the first one, which is tagged mostly for informational, was 34145, add technicals values document. This is a result of work from the team working on looking at the next 10 years of Node, what will make us successful. And, you know, as a basis for that, we thought we needed to agree on the technical values shared by the project and what we've seen used to make trade-offs. So this is a PR that reflects that work. There's been a number of people chiming in. Just think it's good that we have as many people ensure that it's consistent with, you know, what they've seen and believe as well. So I think there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's about 20 approvals so far, but you know, I'll take it off the agenda for now, but just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that and has a chance to take a look. Any questions on that one before we move on? No? Okay, so the next one is 35037, change requirements for objection dismissal. This was tagged for the agenda. Let me take a look who tagged that for the agenda. I think it was Rich who added it to the agenda. It's a bit early for him today, I know. Does anybody else have enough context to bring that one up for discussion? I think Mateo, you show us as an objector on that one.
Sorry, which one? I kind of
This is 35037, change requirements for objection dismissal.
Oh, yes. It's essentially I am objecting because I think it will completely remove the TSC for its role of arbiter when the consensus seeking approach fails. So essentially, the removing the some of the changes that are being put forward to our governance have the result of making an objection to a change to appear coming in completely redundant. So it's no point in saying no to on a PR landing in the first place. So the result is that we are seeking consensus to the point that if you are objecting, we don't want to hear your voice objecting. So I'd
have to agree with that.
This doesn't. I agree that there is a problem to solve, though. Okay, so I agree that there is a problem to solve, and we need to make smooth to improve the path of PRs that are easy to land and that are non-controversial, so that they don't wait forever. Even the 48 hours is too long, I agree. But on the other side, it's not.
Right. I think for this one, like the reason I thought it might have been okay is that it was more of the objecting and then not being responsive.
Yes, but there have been so many discussions on this between
Right.
this email and so on.
Yep.
It's very hard for can you pass the link me? Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, sure, for sure.
I can't. It's.
Yep. Here's the link, and I think like this is the change was, if the objector is unresponsive for 7 days after the.
Yeah,
says,
I am. So the problem for me is that the objector here will
Right.
need to stay active, and every 7 days says no. I keep objecting.
Right. I think what
it
the
doesn't make
intent
any
was
sense.
that you shouldn't be able to just say I object, and then not participate in a discussion.
It's totally fine.
Yeah.
That's my. As long as it's clear that an opinion is final.
Right.
As long as it's clear that an opinion is final and there is nothing to move that forward, it's no. It's clear that the next step will be go to the TSC and ask for a vote.
Right.
There is no.
If I can interject one thing there, like I think what one of the challenges with that approach becomes, and I'm not saying that I have a solution, but it's, when we have objections that are in a PR, and then let's say it takes like 1 or 2 weeks to get to the point, or like, okay, we have like a single objector and we're not getting over that. Then we take it to the TSC. Then the TSC can take 1, 2, 3 weeks for them to get it to a point where they're like, okay, we'll have a vote. And then when we talk about taking a vote, then it takes us like 2 weeks to actually get the vote together. And then it takes us 2 weeks to finalize the vote. And all of a sudden, like something that could have hopefully maybe been resolved in 2 days because there's a single objection, or maybe we're close to rough consensus, now takes us like 2 or 3 months to reach a conclusion that 99% of the time, like, reflects the conclusion we probably could have come to if we just overrode a lone objection. And so to me, that, like, I'm not saying that this is the right solution, but that's the problem I would love to see us try to fix. And I don't want to, at the same time, I don't want to undermine individuals from having opinions or objecting and sticking to them. But I do think that the current process that we have is so verbose and not at all efficient. It also ends up like really resulting in people on the flip side, if there are objections on their PRs, just maybe throwing up their hands and giving up because it's just not worth fighting for months to get something.
But this thing it completely goes into the direction of, no point in objecting in the first place.
Yeah, it's going to end up, I mean, just to kind of reword that a different way, Miles, from what you just said, is, because we have a problem with dealing with objections, we're just going to disincentivize people to object at all. And when the actual problem is our process for dealing with the objection. And
Right.
Yes, I recognize that this PR is trying to make steps in that direction, but I think it needs to be worked through a little bit more.
So
I
I
think
think
this
it's going to
one,
have exactly the effect that Mateo is suggesting.
yeah, I guess like one thing that might split the difference, and maybe Mateo, you can chime in if you think this way. Like I've been, like reading through that RFC on rough consensus from the IETF and trying to think about ways to implement it. If your biggest concern here, Mateo, is that like it kind of doesn't give the TSC the level of power, or like kind of takes away the TSC's role as the arbitrator, is maybe a better way to put it. Perhaps there's something that we could explore in giving TSC members more autonomy for overriding objections without requiring us building consensus around the whole TSC. And something like that may actually even make more sense, especially like if I use modules as an example. I'd say like myself and Targos, and to a certain extent Mateo, but like the majority of the TSC don't actually have really deep knowledge on that subsystem right now. So anytime something has gone to the TSC, it almost always ends up punting back to the person who knows. I would say Mateo Streams is like that with you, or HTTP 2, that's you, James. So if we all kind of trust each other, maybe there's a way in which we could minimize the need for a committee-wide consensus or vote and allow people to be more autonomous on the TSC to make these decisions. And if other TSC members disagree with that, like, we can have things in place, but maybe we could fast track this process.
Well, maybe the allusion to fast track is actually good. Maybe the approach would be, rather than forcing it automatically to a vote, we can allow a TSC member within the GitHub thread to propose that an objection be dismissed. And as long as there are no objections to that dismissal, and at least two other TSC members agreeing to it in the GitHub thread, then we proceed. If the person making the objection wants to appeal,
I think we've lost you, James.
We have lost James. Anyway, I would like to say that
Am I back?
Oh,
Yep.
yes, you're back. Yeah.
okay, sorry, sorry, it switched from mobile data to Wi-Fi. What I was saying is, maybe we can follow an approach similar to the fast track model, where within the GitHub thread itself, if a TSC member proposes that an objection can be dismissed, it would require two other TSC members to agree to that and no objections, just like we do with the fast track model, and then we can dismiss it. If the person making the objection, if they want to appeal that, then they can appeal that to the TSC by posting a comment in the thread and escalating it. But that would at least give us a way of kind of streamlining the process. For the folks that are actively following the conversation, the TSC members that are involved can make that decision.
Yeah, I certainly think, like, I'd had some similar thoughts that, like, is there a way we can trust our, each other TSC members to do the right thing and therefore not have it come back to the full TSC? So having something like, some number of TSC members be able to do that on their own makes a lot of sense. I think that's the larger problem that we're discussing. This particular PR, at least my understanding, was it was trying to address, the case where collaborators say object, but there's no clarity on why, and then people try and ask for clarification and they don't respond. So it's kind of the non-responsive after making a, not a final objection like Mateo says. I think I definitely agree that once it's like, hey, we've had a discussion, that's the end of it. You don't want to have every week you have to, like, basically say, yeah, no, I still object, right? Like, that's a totally different thing. It's more like if somebody says, I object, no other information. And I think what this was intended to do was to say, oh, and now somebody has said, well, how about we do this? Or here's a compromise, and there's no interaction to, on that. So anyway, a little bit different, but maybe we need to just deal with the larger problem versus smaller things first.
From my point of view, the biggest problem is there is a bigger problem, and all of these are trying to, hotfix certain things where
Right.
The bigger problem, where the actual thing, what's not working, it's bigger, and it's on possibly in the TSC charter itself.
Right.
And that's what we should change. Now, fixing this is just adding a sentence to what is proposed. An objector can mark his decision as final, and then the only path forward for that PR should be to be escalated to the TSC or something similar. It's actually would resolve my objection.
Yep.
And as long as there is a way to say, I don't want to be engaged anymore, this is wrong. Okay.
Yeah, but
Right.
But I would say that I would say that we have to qualify that. I mean, so someone cannot just say this is wrong and leave it only at that, right? They have to give an explanation as to why
Of course,
it's
of
wrong.
course. Like,
So I think
Let me
I think
make
there's
an
a couple of
example.
things that we do.
Adding quick to Node Core because of the SSL patch. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a substantiated objection that it's very hard to that, you know, it's substantiated, it's final until that patch is needed. So this is, you know, it's not possible to, otherwise you can keep poking everybody until they agree.
Right, yeah, definitely. I don't think the intention of this was ever to let somebody be exhausted by every week having to do it. It was to make sure that you had some interaction, enough of that interaction until it's like, yeah, we understand each other and we're not going to agree, right? Like that's going to happen.
So overall, this is a more like actually writing down what has already happened before multiple times, because I have reviewed so many PRs and also pinged people if there were some concerns, and there were multiple cases where concerns were resolved even though the person never responded again. This has been like after a couple of weeks normally, you know, like first ping 1 week and then second ping the next week, and then resolved normally a third week after. And the case which we are discussing now is not the common case, that someone really says, okay, I'm totally objecting to this, but it was normally someone that effectively not respond anymore at all. So if we add the sentence from Matteo, it should already solve the major pain point.
I wanted to just add, I think one of the things with the sentence with Matteo, and perhaps even like a different way that we can frame it, like thinking about rough consensus, like that is kind of the point that there is no more debate. And it's like, are we going to override this objection, or is this objection substantive enough to stop the progress? And I don't even think it needs to be just the objector who can raise that flag. I think like if we can generally reach consensus that we have kind of debated something to the end of, and we just know like here is a clear objection, and either we agree that this objection is enough to stop the work or it isn't, like we shouldn't continue the debate on it. Matteo, would you say that that's like a good characterization?
As long
as,
more or less, yes, as long as the decision for this is not done by the people involved, but it goes back to the TSC, essentially. So it's whenever there is a situation when consent, so by the way that the charter is set up, we have that resolving consensus-seeking problems falls on the TSC right now. And it's as long as the TSC in one form or another, the way James proposes it or something else, is in the loop of removing the objection, that it should be something that's taken very seriously, okay? And it removes the objection from a collaborator, then I'm good. So as long as there is a something for that that's not like automatic and done by, you know, people involved in the PRs. So that's it.
Right, I think because Miles, what you described doesn't necessarily get at what the situation where Ruben was talking about. It's like there was an objection, but then there's been some discussion. Proposals to change have been made. The PR may have already been updated, but then there's no response from the objector to say, yeah, you've addressed what I've what I was worried about, or no, I still want to object, right? And so I think you know, if you object, but then just totally forget about it, it's not necessarily unreasonable that you know, at some point we need to move forward and it gets removed automatically.
But that is it's already covered. This is already covered, Michael. So the sentence, the case that you mentioned is already covered. If somebody says I object because of this thing, and then somebody says, okay, I have the author of the PR says, I have addressed that objection in this way. If the person does not review for 7 days, that thing can be dismissed. It's already in.
I think also the solution that we're talking about where TSC members autonomously can remove objections also covers that case. So like a straw proposal of what that could look like would be a TSC member says there's an objection. It seems like it's been taken care of. I'm going to override it. I'm doing this objection override fast track thing. They open an issue on the TSC repo, letting other TSC members know one objects to it within 48 hours. Could be like a fact that if we can normalize and document fast tracking removing objections, that also covers kind of any case where there would be an objection, including the case where someone vanishes. And it kind of falls on us as TSC members to operate in good faith and be good stewards. And I think that as long as we are, if on paper it looks good, if someone press it, I don't think that there should be problems there. And I think that I trust the members of the TSC, with that responsibility of stewardship.
And just to support your point, Miles, I think we tend to work a lot better in issues than we do at meetings, right? Because we are not able to make it at that time, and somebody earlier pointed out that this can drag on. But I think this proposal is good because we do work better in the issue tracker, and we can just leave our comment in the TSC issue for that, right? And it seems like it might work faster.
Yeah. So I can take a stab at some comments describing this kind of alternative approach in thread for this particular PR. But yeah, it would work very similar to what we currently do with fast tracks, with the exception that only a TSC member could do it. And then we can go from there. I'm not sure there's much more we can say right now about it, but yeah, I think there's a couple of alternative approaches that this PR just currently does.
That sounds good to me. Does anybody have any concerns or things they want to discuss further on that before we move on to the next issue? Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is number 35015, util add util.parseargs. This is one that I added. And basically, there's a disagreement, which looks like it's in the PR. It looks like it's gotten to the point where further discussion isn't going to help move it forward. Let me capture the latest comment that has the specific question. Where is it? Okay, and thank you, GitHub, for hiding my issue that I want. So this is I guess it doesn't format too well. Here's the link if you want to go to the issue, the particular comment on the link. But basically, the disagreement seems to be over whether to add, with the parameters take an array of strings or take an array of strings and a single string as a way to make it, easier to use the API. In the points of view are one, it's no, we shouldn't do that because it's a potential source of confusion errors, and the other one is it improves the user experience because for simpler cases, you don't have to provide an array of strings with a single entry. You can just provide a string. So I know this is one where, like, separately we've had discussions about how do we, perhaps not push things back to GitHub as often to try and resolve these kinds of things. Is it something we can, spend 10 minutes now in the meeting and actually try and come to a decision versus pushing off till next week? Or
I think I think part of the challenge here is the amount of time. Like this particular issue, I mean, I've known it's taken a while to land, but because I've been doing other things, I have not been able to actually follow it. So I like right now, given like a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation, I'm not sure I'd have enough context to be able to weigh in on it.
yeah, and I think that's where part of our discussion is that these things then, like, okay, we'll kick it to next meeting. We still don't have enough. We then finally discuss it. We kick it back to GitHub, and it's like, how do we close that loop to say, like, within 1 week we will give an answer, or
I don't really understand what is the objection in clearly. I tried to follow the link and I didn't find it.
I mean, basically the objection is that the API includes, you see, it says string or array of strings. So is that param listed there can take an array of strings or a string?
Oh, okay.
The objector is basically saying it should only take an array, no string, not a single string as an alternative.
Okay.
And from one point of view, adding that option makes it more likely to error prone. And from the other perspective, it includes the developer experience.
Okay. It's fine. Okay, sorry. I understand the problem.
Yeah, no problem. So, but I think back to James's point is, maybe this is a concrete example of, what do we do to make sure that, we come up with ideas that make sure that says, yeah, I understand, James, haven't had a chance to look at it. We don't have enough context, but our current course and speed has been, okay, well, yeah, we'll talk about it next week. And then we have a different set of people in the meeting. We don't necessarily get the answer asynchronously in the issue, so just what kind of ideas can we come up with that we will shorten the time that it's been taking us to kind of weigh in here?
So in most cases where things like that have happened before, as far as I see it, most of the API is agreed upon, and it's more like a minor difference that people cannot yet agree upon. And in that case, we mostly did it that we first went with an implementation that did not include in the part that was difficult to decide upon. And then we had a second PR that would improve the situation as such, with a second PR to only have that case. And then it's sometimes easier to work out if that might be included or not. That would be my take in this case.
Right.
We
I guess
also have a precedent.
But I guess you're suggesting then you say, yeah, we'll take the objection, force the author to update, and then submit a new PR to get, what they thought originally should have been the case in.
It's probably not a good experience for the person writing the code originally. That's definitely not the case.
And I think some of the feedback I'm getting is like to the point of where, people might just say, I'll just forget it then.
If I may,
for what it's worth, we have a precedent for taking both an array and a string for the same parameter, and it's standard IO for child process. You can either specify what should be done with each file descriptor in particular, or you can just say inherit, and that's a string, and then that will basically pass everything through to the parent process. So we already have an example of this. It's in like an option property. So it wasn't confusing there.
It's from what it's worth, I find those multi-type things really, really hard in general. So if it's needed for some reason, let's add it. But I don't. Given that process.argv, it's an array already segmented. Doesn't make any sense to add this. But I'm not saying that it should not. Like, it's just essentially, unneeded code from my point of view. But we have a lot of that already, and I maintain a significant chunk of it. So I'm not, it's, for the sake of legacy, happy to maintain this type of stuff. But for new API, maybe no. But I'm also LGTMing the code as it is because I think it's a great addition. So it's not. I don't know. It's not a matter. It's not a big deal. I don't know. That's my personal take on this, but other people might disagree.
Yeah, and I think it's that we have a case where the original author feels strongly one way, but then somebody is, more strongly on the other side of like, hey, we shouldn't be doing this kind of thing, right? And it's.
I agree with the approach Ruben would recommend.
If I may, I just want to add one more point. I did not request changes on the PR simply because someone else already had, and I don't really feel strongly about the feature I don't feel strongly enough about the feature, but I don't consider its default behavior to be safe. And I think we shouldn't add APIs for convenience that are not safe by default. So in particular, the behavior that bothers me is that if you specify a flag which does not take a value and add equals false to the argument, then the API will silently convert that false into a true. So for example, if you specify -- run as root equals false, it will still result in run as root is true. So I don't consider the default behavior of the API to be safe.
Is that related to this because of the option around the string array or a
No,
string?
sorry, it's just if I've got 2 requested changes. If they had requested changes, I probably would have requested changes on those grounds, but I didn't expect us to come to a conclusion soon, so I didn't want to really add the burden. It's just another thing we should think about, in my opinion.
But if anything, like I could see for the originator, it'll be almost more annoying if this gets resolved and then there's a new objection that says, oh, but wait a sec, what about this other piece?
Right, okay. I mean, I'm not gonna
if you know what
it.
I mean, right?
Yeah, I am not gonna block it. Simply, as I said, I don't really care enough about this API to stand in the way of progress here.
Right.
I just want to bring it up in case other TSC members want to take a look and form their own opinion.
Okay, so the suggestion, it sounds like a few people have chimed in support of Ruben's approach, which is to ask the author to split into 2 PRs, a second one which adds the additional string. Is that the correct characterization? Ruben, have I got that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I am concerned a little bit that will, like you said, just delay it, sort of dragging out it'll be another week before that happens and we haven't the new issue on our agenda to discuss, but.
So, and what we could tell though, that there is concern and that we are not certain that it might be resolved in a second MPR. That could be said at the same time.
Right. So it's a few people on the TSC have the opinion that it would be better not to have multi-type parameters. I think, Matteo, that's what you were suggesting, that in general, that's something you'd like to avoid?
In general, yes, but I'm not going to oppose somebody that really want that to be in. I personally find those things really hard to work with.
Right.
Those type of overloads does not really fit. Like they make the implementation of the code convoluted,
Mhm.
and they cause potential performance issues down the line, and so on and so forth. So it's not something that I would encourage. On the other side, in this specific case, there's not enough ground to block it if somebody really wants to block it.
Right. So if we look at the future, then unless there's other people who would block it, we'll be back to the same situation. If we say, hey, can you break it into two PRs? The new PR is created. We'll now be back into the same situation with the same objection that we need to resolve. And I don't think it's clear how the TSC would resolve that yet. I think Ruben was getting at, maybe we had a feeling, but
my personal opinion is similar to the one from Matteo, for example, because it's also error prone, and in general, it's best to have one way to use an API. That way you are certain you're using it correct. And there's a lot of code out there that does not do that because there are many overloads. And then there is a lot of buggy code because there are so many different ways of doing something, and people just don't know which one is correct in a specific situation and which one is not. Therefore, it's unlikely to land. We should probably provide some statement that even if the PR is split into two, it's unlikely to be accepted later on.
right. Like if that's the case, I think we'd be better off giving that feedback versus saying do some extra work and then we'll tell you no, right? Like if we think that's the way it's trending, like if the TSC, we've got the question, I'd feel bad if we say, well, go do some extra work, and then we'll later come to a conclusion that says, no, versus having just being able to say that without asking for that extra work. That's kind of my feeling on, going back to an author and asking them to do more stuff if we think we already are leaning in one way or the other.
Tobias, are you objecting to the PR in general?
I'm unsure, to be honest. I don't want to block it, but I really feel like we shouldn't have this kind of unsafe behavior in core as a convenience tool. So I'm really unsure whether I should block it or not.
For what it's worth, I'm about to block it based on what you said, because while you may not feel strongly about it, I believe that turning false into true is quite simply incorrect behavior, and that the PR should handle that case, and then it's fine.
Okay, in that case, I won't have to block it.
Right. So that's a separate issue, which is probably, that's not one that's come to an impasse, right? It's probably just something that hasn't been brought up, and hopefully there's a way to address it so that it does it in the right way, right? But if that is resolved, then separately we still have, this other aspect, which, there is an impasse between the collaborators. And I guess us saying we're not going to block it doesn't necessarily help, because there's an objection and we're going to need to decide whether we override that objection or not.
So as it stands right now, it feels like we are not going to override the objection.
Okay, so I think is that the from the initial discussion in the should we paste that into the issue in terms of, from initial TSC discussion, there are a few TSC members who share the concern about, who prefer if we don't have multi-type APIs, and therefore, not looking to override the objection at this point. Are we comfortable doing that with a subset of the TSC? Do we need to put that into an issue somewhere so other members can comment before we do that? I mean, I think
it sounds like we have a couple of TSC members that are right into the issue that have, fairly strong opinions on it. I mean, going back to the conversation we just had, let's trust them to do the right thing. So I'd say
I would take that even a step further, James. We have quorum right now. I would love to propose that as a TSC, we actively defer to the subset of people right now who say that they have strong opinions about this PR to manage the rest of the process here, including override objections and kind of see it through. If people don't disagree with that, I think it could be a great way of kind of, testing out this idea of letting a subset of the TSC manage these things.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so who are we identifying as those people?
Who wants to be in that subset? I guess could be a great way to start.
Sorry, could you clarify what subset you mean?
I think Miles' suggestion is that we basically delegate
who wants to be the group of people?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Miles.
Sorry, my connection has a delay. So apologies for speaking over you, Michael.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
But I think you were just about to say what I was about to say, which was who wants this PR moving forward, so that unless that subset itself cannot reach consensus, there isn't really a reason to bring this to the full TSC again.
Yeah, I agree.
But I'm not sure we're getting volunteers.
I can volunteer.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. We will I will write up a little something in the minutes on that front, and we'll let Matteo and Tobias engage, and we'll basically bring it back to the TC if necessary. Otherwise, it should be resolved. Drop minimum waiting time as a hard guideline. This is 33,879. And I think, let's see, agenda. James, you gonna take that one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So on this one, I mean, yeah, this is a proposal by Anna following the contribution survey that I did in spring. So basically, the idea is to completely eliminate the minimum time to land guideline. All other conditions to land a PR would remain the same. It would have to pass CI. It would have to get the sign-offs. It would just eliminate the time, the minimum time limit. There's been some objections in the thread from multiple people, indicating that the time limit at least makes it easier for people internationally to review changes. A compromise proposal has been put forth to greatly reduce the timelines, making the minimum 24 hours and with multiple sign-offs, and then I think it's 72 hours with only one sign-off. That would be down from 48 hours and 7 days for those two cases. but the people that have objected have not, despite multiple pings and requests, have not weighed in on whether that compromise approach is sufficient for them. So it really just kind of comes down to CSC to figure to decide this. There's right now 3 basic proposals on the table. 3 options. One option is keep everything the same as it is now, status quo. The second option is exactly what Anna's PR suggests, is completely eliminate the time. And the third option is reduce the times to 24 and 72.
Right, with a sign off from the code owners, which I think is the key thing, right? Like, because currently it says 72 hours with 1 sign off. So and currently the time limit, remind me, is I think it's 48 or 72 hours, right?
It's 48 hours,
Right.
unless it's fast tracked.
Right.
If there's only 1 sign off on the PR, it has to wait a full week.
Right.
So what the compromise proposal would be is, if there are at least 2 sign-offs, it could land in 24 hours. And I think that the caveat is that at least one of those have to be from a code owner, if the code owner, if it has coverage.
Right.
Otherwise, it can it has to wait 72 hours to land.
Right, versus 7 days, so it shortens that. I wonder if, like, that second one said 72 hours with 1 sign off from a code owner.
No, I'd still, I think that, I think it's 72 hours if there's 1 sign off. There's no objections within 72 hours.
Well, I know that's what it says. I'm just wondering if, like, Mateo's mentioned cases where it's like if in some specific areas you really want to have a code owner have a chance to take a look, right? So I don't know if, I'd be, I don't know, Mateo, if you think 72 hours is long enough versus the 7 days. Like, are you I guess I'm asking, are you happy if 72 hours is long enough, but just any sign off?
It's, to be honest, it's I would need to think some of it. It's again, if a subsystem, like, on certain cases, probably no. On the other end, it's probably going to be fine. So it's going to be very strange if a PR on something lands that is now on something critical, that gets reviews only by 1 person, gets skipped by everybody else, and then somebody, like, if it's complex enough and change something complex, I suspect somebody said, well, wait a minute, let's review this properly. Right. So I find it very, very hard I find it a very hard case. So that's probably happens for something trivial that's not, don't get much attention. I don't know. I'm just that I am this with the 72 hours. I'm probably fine. The short term is more problematic for me.
Okay, so you're not, with 72 hours, you figure people will do the right thing. That if it's a complicated thing, they're going to wait longer if there's only a single reviewer anyway, which is probably, I mean, that makes sense to me.
So one thing I want to bring up really quickly that's part of this discussion is there was feedback about code owners, specifically that not all of the code owner groups or teams that we have have the same degree of vetting to get people on those code owner lists. And so, I have not actually reviewed or audited all those lists, and I can't really speak to that comment. But there was, like, definitely a concern about, an equal quality of review from all of those different code owner lists. So I would just add as kind of a quick aside there, that if we do want to explore code owners as being a gate there, we may want to, do an audit of those lists and, make sure that the people who are in those lists truly do own that code.
I absolutely share those concerns.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable to say we like 3, but we need an audit of the code owners, right, to go along with it.
And have certain subsystem know that are covered by at least 2, 3, 4 people as needed, essential. So
that's kind of it's almost a separate problem. Like if we only have one person who can actually act as a code owner, that doesn't mean we shouldn't delay the PR to get them to review it, right? Like we have a problem, but it doesn't, in my mind, it wouldn't say we should let things land faster because we don't have enough people to review a critical area. Like that's something we should fix, but it doesn't mean we should land things that shouldn't land, right? So on this one, one of the suggestions or one of the thoughts I'd had is like, if we as a group here think that the proposal for overriding the objection is 3 with a code owner on it, maybe the path is to, either we can, although we haven't, agreed on that, the subsets of TSC members making overriding the objections, we could either go with that, or we could, open an issue in the TSC repo that says this is what we think this is the proposed path. If there aren't any objections from TSC members by the the end of the week or sometime, this is what we'll basically use consensus seeking, where if we don't hear objections, this is the proposal we say we're moving forward with on this one. Does that make sense to people?
I think so.
Okay, I'll write that up and I'll take the action to open that issue, because that's one way. Like I think if in the meetings we can come up with a proposed path, even if it's going to be wrong in the end, it will hopefully spur discussion. So we'll do that for this one. At this point, we did want to reserve some private time. We only have 5 minutes left. The last 3, I'm not sure. Like there's the proposed to rename the default branch, which we've talked and is really ongoing. So I don't think we necessarily need to talk about that. There's the process to change the default unhandled rejections equals throw, but I think there's been a vote and that's closed on that one. And then the last one would be the FS simple copy operations and more cleanups. So do people think we need to talk about that one this week? I don't have enough context.
It's not really urgent out of my perspective.
Okay.
We should speak about it in general at some point, but and yes, it would be nice about the 15 version, but in the end, it's not really something important, and that it has to go into 15. So
okay.
let's just
So we'll leave that on the agenda for the next meeting. If people can chime in, take a look offline, we'll do that. And I'm going to close out the meeting for today. So thanks to everybody who's been watching.